ahead and call the council workshop for Tuesday, 18 April to order. The time is 6 p.m. despite what the agenda says. Okay. So I would ask the clerk to call the roll, please. Well, you got it on the agenda. So I assumed we were doing.
That's fine. I still have the mic, so.
Oh, you don't have the mic. Okay.
We don't have to do it either.
We're not required to do roll call. I didn't think so. It wasn't on the list. Okay, we'll just skip the roll call. For those of you that are following it in the audience, and I guess anybody that might listen to the recording, we got a pretty busy night tonight, just because of the way things come together. We have two pretty significant agenda items tonight. The first one is advanced life support. We have a short presentation up front that really covers some of the technical aspects associated with running a levy. We have asked the members that served on the ALS task force to come this evening, and I appreciate, gentlemen, you coming. I'd like to go ahead, Chief Creekmore, why don't you just introduce everybody?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. To my left is Chief Todd Jensen from Grand Fire and Rescue. He served as the chair of the committee, and he also does this type of work for agencies throughout the United States. And John Roberts, DuPont Fire Department. Chief Lee Chase from DuPont Fire. He served this department well several years ago. And Mike Winkler from the finance background. Tonight, Nate Jean could not be here due to work commitments.
Okay, thank you. Just a little background. We commissioned the task force last year, and they looked in detail at the current state of emergency medical services in DuPont and asked the question, do we need advanced life support in DuPont? And then if the answer is yes, what are options for providing advanced life support, and what recommendation we make? So you all have the copy of the report. We won't go through all that. It's been out for quite a while. Since that time, we have been giving a presentation throughout the city of DuPont, around a dozen times now. Several hundred people have had the opportunity to see it. And we thought this might be the case, but we asked some questions at the end of it. And the first question everybody had, or answer, was most people did not realize that we did not have paramedics serving in the DuPont Fire Department. So that was something of a shock to them. And they understood the difference between advanced life support and basic life support, and what an EMT can provide versus a paramedic. And the overwhelming response that we received was, yes, we want ALS, yes, we want to vote on it, and we want the 5-person response. So that's what we've gotten. I know a few of you have had the opportunity to attend some of the presentations, and so I think you probably saw the same type of response that we did. If next week you vote to have a measure put on the ballot, then we will continue an education process between now and when the ballot is taken to once again serve to educate the population about what we're asking from them. Obviously, it's always hard when you ask people to raise taxes on themselves, and so a well-informed electorate probably has a better chance of making a good decision. We also remember the history and previous attempts to do something like this by the city. And some of you sitting at the table have been on both sides of that issue. But I will tell you that we took those lessons to heart, worked very hard to make this very narrowly scoped, go for a specific purpose, and find the most economical way to do this. We think we've done that. I credit the task force with really some exhaustive look at it and great input from the public. And so that has all come together. You saw the basic presentation last week. So the whole intent, when we get through this presentation, I will turn it over to the council. And the task force is here to really answer your questions and let you all debate the issue so that the intent next week will be a public hearing. And then an opportunity for you to vote on a resolution. With that, Ted, you want to talk through this one?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to run through the different levies we have here. Like everything in government, it starts out pretty easy and it's pretty complicated after that. There's two types, and I'll get into that. So the purpose is just to walk you through those. The action tonight is just to consider, have you guys consider what the different options are, provide some feedback so we can bring the proper flavor of levy to the levy lid lift to the vote next week. And then on the 25th, you're either going to select or not to send this out to the citizens. That's the true action item. So I'm going to cover how much the city can legally levy, what makes for a valid election, the basic levy and their options, multi-year levy and its options, some considerations just to start the conversation, what a ballot title is, what it has to have, and then the mayor started with there's just a repeat slide of community feedback. So how much can the city levy? Statutory limit for us, because we're in a library or fire district, is $3.60 per thousand. Currently, we're pulling $1.17 plus the 50-cent levy for $1.67. So subtract that out of $3.60, and it leaves us $1.43 levy capacity. And so a 5-person response, an extra 102 is well under that limit. That is an easy way to do this. Of course, the technical way with the finance director and the state won't even come into play because we're so far under it. So what makes for a ballot election? An initial fire levy in Washington has to have 60% approval with some turnout, with a turnout requirement of 40% of the last general election. So, talking with the auditor, believe it or not, I finally got this back today. We would need 1,515 turnout, and 60% of that would have to be yes. Because it's a levy, statutorily, there's one other way to do this. If we don't have a 40% turnout in the last general election, then we take the number of yes votes that we would need using the 60% of 40%, so that is 24% times the number of voters last time. So if we have less than 40% turnout in the general election, we could still pass a levy with 909 yes votes. The number we need to turn out next time is 1,515. I don't expect any problems. We haven't had any elections that have been that low of a turnout. 3787 to 1515. So I'm sure we'll have a ballot election. If you, interestingly enough, once a levy is in place in Washington for fire, if you want to continue it, much like our regular EMS levy that we're familiar with, you just need 50% and no turnout requirements. So what's a basic levy? That's the typical or old-fashioned basic levy lid lift. You set a new levy rate once and it sits there forever. It's subject to the 1% cap like everything else. You can also make it temporary. Fire levies you can do for 6 or 10 years, permanent. You don't have to put the purpose on the ballot, but everything I've read screams you ought to, because MRSC actually says there's only 2 cases they know of in state history where someone's passed without the description of it on the ballot. So my recommendation would be let's put the purpose down. And that can be held in any election. You don't need to be an election. The multi-year levy and options. Basically, the way to remember this is the multi-year allows you to accelerate or add an inflationary or some sort of increase each year. You must name the purpose. It's no longer optional. You must put the tax rate on the next slide. You must put the tax rate in year 1 on the ballot title. So, for instance, if you were going to raise an extra 50 cents or an extra $1, you have to say the first year's rate is $1. And then, interestingly enough, on the out years, years 2 through 6, you are not allowed to put the mill rate, the draw rate, and that's again because Washington collects an amount. They don't base their taxes on the mill rate or the rate per thousand. You also have to explain the calculation method if you are going to increase it. It's limited to 6 years. You don't get the 10-year option with this one. And you can't supplant pre-2009 levies. We're clear, we don't have any pre-2009 levies. And you may make it permanent if you put it in the ballot title. If not, it's not permanent, then the levy will roll back to where it was as if it never existed. But again, under state law, the county auditor is required to accelerate that at 1% for each of those years. This election must be in August and November. So here's some considerations just to kind of start the conversation. Permanent levy, the revenue erodes over time. It's $1.50 per thousand today. After period of 6 years is not the same. Again, Washington collects an amount. So today, when you set the amount, let's say it's $1 million. By year 6, you're still pulling $1 million, but the whole net assessed value of the city is slowly rising. So the actual rate will be less than $1.50. So the amount you can pull erodes. And then secondly, and this is for you guys to decide, how do people feel about a permanent increased tax forever? Something you guys can consider. Sunsetting, let's stick to 6 or 10 years. If it's a multi-year, like we just went through, and it's reapproved, conceivably, the revenue would never erode. I've got to be honest, I've never heard of that, but that's supposed to be revenue that could happen. If it's basic, if you sunset it, and the citizens like it after 6 years or 10 years, whatever the limit is, then it would actually reset every next number of years. So that would help a little bit in lost revenue. And then again, what do people feel about trying it and then reassessing it? So the staff recommendation, I want to get that just a second. So the staff recommendation, looking at all this that we've gone through, would be we would sunset it, and we would leave it for 6 years, not make it too long. We think that that allows citizens to try it. I feel like if they get to choose again to discontinue it. Secondly, it's less confusing, and we make our living and staff trying to make up deltas around here. So the amount that this erodes over 6 years would not cause undue hardship for the city, and we don't recommend that you accelerate and increase it every year. So the basic levy in 6 years is what we recommend. So what's the ballot title look like? On the left is out of Voter's Guide from 2016. Gig Harbor put out an EMS levy. And then on the right is the actual ballot. Ours will be somewhat similar. Next slide, please. And so our starting draft will look something like this. The first sentence is kind of standard. You kind of need to identify the legislative body that passes the resolution, president vote. Then you say what the proposition would be, why, tax rates, things like that. One question I have for you is, guidance on insert no copay language in there. I'm going to get to this on the next slide, but it is, Mayor, you'd agree, it's a pretty common theme with all citizens that if you allowed us a no copay provision, it would offer some value, and they really want to see that in there. So I question the council as you talk about this is, should we insert some no copay language? And by putting on the ballot title, it locks it in legally. So if I'm a citizen and the city says, well, yeah, we're going to do that, that's not the same as seeing on the ballot. Well, anything on the ballot we legally have to do. So I throw that out for consideration. Last slide.
Does everybody understand what the no copay would do for the citizens? Okay.
I'm actually going to get into that.
You are, okay.
On this very slide. So the mayor talked about who they went to and who we went to. I went to a few of those, of course. The feedback we got were routine surprise and concern we don't have paramedics in ALS. And citizens are highly desirable with having no out-of-pocket costs for residents. So what does that mean? If you are a resident of DuPont, they would like to see, go ahead and bill my insurance, but if there's a difference in copay, we don't want to pay it. We're already paying the ALS tax. And you know what? If I don't have insurance, I don't want to pay it. If I'm not a DuPont resident, it would be like any other medical service that we're all accustomed to. You would get a bill for the difference, the copay. If you didn't pay it, you'd go to collections like everything else we do around here. So that's what the no copay means. The citizens have said that, if we're going to pay these kind of taxes, then we don't want to pay for an individual ambulance ride. I would tell you from a staff perspective, the amount of revenue that would lose is probably not going to be significant enough to have us worry about it. Last year we gained about $70,000 in revenue from our transports. We already have this policy in effect now, about the last 10 months, Larry, 8 months. It hasn't really affected revenue. When we go to ALS and start doing all the transports, again, the insurance companies reimburse at a rate that's commensurate with our expenses. Again, very few people don't have insurance. That would be an anomaly. And then, of course, the towners have to pay for it. Citizens uniformly eagerly supported levy for a task force with 5-person response. So here's some common questions we got. Why don't you use volunteers to do the ALS? The biggest problem is the state requires, if you provide ALS at all, for a 24/7 coverage period. And to get the number of volunteers, A, that wouldn't be possible, B, they all have day jobs. So scheduling that it wouldn't be possible. And we do use volunteers in the city DuPont Fire Department. I know there's a big rumor going around that we don't. I don't understand that. We've had them for years. So don't get confused by that. The other question they had was, what if Falk doesn't show up? Well, we had to be honest. Then you get BLS with transport, meaning you're not getting treatment on the way to the hospital. You're just going to get a quick ride. And the mayor has some anecdotes he could share someday if you wanted, what we heard from the citizens. And then the question is, if it's established, will we have to pay for any other public? So that's my quick brief. Any questions on the levy options? Sure.
You say residents, if we were to put that language in there, is that the language? And second, is it resident or taxpayer / homeowner?
Yeah, so that was a good question. That came up a couple times. Is it homeowner or would a renter be covered? And truly, as a community, the crowds we're talking with, look, we the renters, we pay everything they pay. So I would suggest that DuPont resident, and no distinction be made between owner and tenant, because the tenants have to pay through the rental, all that stuff anyway. And I would also say the community support that, yes?
Yeah, absolutely, and I guess the other point of that is also employees. You know, we have people that work in the city of DuPont that don't live here, but their businesses pay that tax. So, you know, if you're a resident or an employee in the city of DuPont, my feeling is, you know, that's one of the benefits of being here. If you're associated with that tax, then that's one of the benefits of it. If you're doing a drive-by, you know, on your way to Seattle and stop to have lunch downtown and have some medical situation, that's when we would pursue a copay if that was appropriate, if their insurance did not cover our costs.
And we don't have sample language for that. It would just be plain English, you know, if passed, residents, or like we'd figure it out. We'll show you next week.
Can you tell me if, is it common to include employees of businesses in the city? Is that done elsewhere?
I'd have to ask our experts at the end of the table.
I don't see that a lot, that particular provision out there. It makes it difficult in the billing process because usually you use a third-party biller. Some larger cities, City of Tacoma does their own billing practices internally. However, there's with HIPAA and now LIMSIS and NIMSIS, 3 compliance, that is a national database process that has to go through for compliance. It makes it very difficult to do Medicare and Medicaid without knowing the exact home address of the particular person. So, for example, most of the ones that we've put together in Pierce County, for those, there's, on top of what you've already spoken about, there are reciprocal agreements. So, for example, if you were to do something with language like you have up here, and your unit was out, and a mutual aid fire unit came in, and you had that reciprocal agreement with another agency, then that would apply that way as well for that person that came in. Now, if you didn't have that reciprocal agreement, and that unit came in, Falk or a West Pierce without that reciprocal agreement, then it would be the full bill to that patient. However, it certainly could be done. It's just not very common.
You know,
That might be,
yeah, and that's fine. And I guess if somebody is injured at the workplace, then whoever they're working for, their insurance ought to be covering that. So,
Sure. I'm fine with the residents to include tax-paying homeowners and renters. I'm not so sure about city employees that don't also reside in Tacoma. Probably want to have a further conversation.
okay, to me, that's not a red line. It was just a thought I had.
Yeah.
Yeah, please, Mike.
Thanks. I'm certainly on the fence on the copay because But where I'm at is it's either all or nothing, because kind of sorting out who's a resident or not a resident may be a really onerous task. So we either just don't go through that, because really, you know, if we have people staying at the hotel, then they're guests within the city, and then we include them into the coverage where you have some level of expectation to get service that you're paying through, you know, the rate that you stay at the hotel, or do you bill back to the hotel? I mean, it just becomes kind of a potential nightmare for sorting out from a billing and a maintenance purpose for our staff. On the other hand, I'm kind of like, pay for your ride. Because those who never call an ambulance or never transported now are kind of supplementing those who are getting a ride. So if you're insured, and you should pay a copay. I mean, so it's not a free clinic either. Just because there's a service we provide and you have the opportunity to bill insurance, you know. So again, I'm not coming down one way or another, but I am offering another point of view that there is a case to be made where people should be paying the copay because they are utilizing a service within the city of DuPont that not everybody is going to utilize in DuPont. So it's open to everyone. We all pay taxes into it, but some are going to utilize it. And we have pay to play for Little League and other things where we pay for a department to run a recreation group, but then we have people paying for the participation in that. So don't say no or yes one way or another. This is something really to consider. And I know what the citizens are saying. The citizens are saying that, but if you never use it and some group of people are always using it and they are insured, for the best interest of all citizens, it may be prudent for them to do the copay. I don't know, because we would have to look at what it would cost to run a billing department that's dedicated to, you know, managing copays and things like that. So I just want to throw that out there because I just think that a lot of us might have seeing different too. We go all or nothing, and we're, you know, transporting a drunk who got his, you know, face slashed in a bar fight at Forelli's. I mean, you'll be paying for him too, potentially, if we go to this guest of the city, you know, kind of aspect. Just remember that managing a program costs money too, not just the transports, but the infrastructure around it and the billing. That costs money. That's part of this levy as well, but that's not coming out of this levy. It's coming out of our general fund to manage those costs. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
The only admin in the levy is what the added battalion should provide, and that's more around training, getting medical supplies ordered, things like that. We would use our current billing company. So yeah, that would be a cut of any bill. That's how they bill. And real quick, I'll just address the DuPont resident. I think like what Chief was saying here, if we restrict it to DuPont addresses, that's very easy for billing companies to do, so maybe that's the answer.
But how many people get permanent addresses when they're in the military that are going to, you know, you have a billing address that they have to come and show a utility bill or?
Yeah, we all get mailing addresses.
Okay.
Even if I was a resident.
So we're going to do mailing addresses.
Right.
So it could be someone staying with them. See, what the little
Sure.
things like it could be a guest, it could be their, you know, grandma for 3 months. So again, just realize that supporting it, and my whole point in this discussion is, it will cost money to go out and bill people individually, and we'll lose revenue if we don't do it the other way. So let's kind of get a number either way, and then make a business decision on what we think the cost would be. We lose revenue, but this is what we think we would save, and not having to go and bill it and have half a head dedicated to billing for EMS. And give us a number so that we can make a decision based on the numbers of that. So I really want to go to the point where I wanted to talk on the multi-levy versus the permanent levy. And I understand, so, you know, we're laying out risks. If we go to a permanent levy, then we have a fixed amount by statute for the state that we can go and renew. And it has a 1% adder, as any levy does. But the other aspect is, if we go to a multi-year, we don't necessarily get pigeonholed into that set amount. We can actually change and grow if need arises. But then we run the risk that people would eventually vote that down, and we move with zero service again. Is that the risk?
True. And the other thing with the multi-year is, if you don't get it reapproved with the escalator, then by law it freezes at the last one, and you'll be in the same boat as the first situation.
Right, so what I want to know is, if it does go into that frozen level, what will be the cost of getting us from BLS to ALS, and it'll be like a one-time cost. Let's put in those terms. There will be like a non-recoverable cost we have to bear to go from BLS to transition to ALS. And would we have to, presuming it failed and people were upset that it failed, they balloted again in 3 years hence, and then it's back on the ballot, we want to reintroduce it for a new group of people living here. What's the cost of bringing that up? And that's another point of decision for us to make, just the data to say.
The voting cost?
Well, of just the non-recoverable cost of going from BLS to ALS, because it's a one-time adder to hire the new staff, train the new staff, but once it's steady state and we're running at levy levels and we're renewing, that we're not, failing and yo-yoing a service back and forth, that we understand that if we fail this, it's gonna have a cost, and we'll go back to the same service we had, but if we wanna introduce it, we're introducing another $250,000 or whatever, I don't know what the amount is, but, so those are kind of numbers that I would be looking for to kind of help,
Let me ask you a question. I think I know off the top of my head, but I want to look before I give the answer. So the one-time unrecoverable cost to get to the 5-person is $1.465 million. The 4-person is $1.12 million. The private contract is the private contract.
right?
It starts at 1.2, but after 5 years, it's already up above 1.45 because it has a 5% escalator. And then the amount to annex into West Pierce, which we also looked at,
Right.
is completely separate. It's really not apples to apples because that's a whole fire department again. But that cost is $333 per thousand. It would not move much from there.
Okay, but again, that's something I think the council will have to consider, is if we go to the option where it could go away, that it has a pretty significant cost to reintroduce it to the city, so.
Councilmember Easter.
Yeah, I'd like to ask gentleman sitting over here, what in your time that you spent evaluating this, what were some of the pay-to-play options, cost recovery methods that were considered, and were there any that were recommended or not carried forward? What were the reasons for that?
Thank you. That very, very good question. If you recall that one chart that you really couldn't see, those were all the options we looked at. We looked at a hospital district or create some type of district like that. But there's not an autonomous scale here. We just see so that was viewed as not an option because it's really not a county-wide version of that. The other options that we talked about obviously was the contract with a private company, but the value was determined not to be there because of the cost in the long term and the value that it would give by having fully trained personnel with the method that was recommended in the past. We looked at the annexation in the West Pierce, and again, that was the cost prohibitive. It was almost double of what was recommended. We looked at things like forming fire districts with other agencies or regional fire authorities, but those take several years to even establish. The money the city would be contributing currently would go away. We would have to buy back all the services the city provides to us now, such as HR, anything to do with building maintenance, legal. So everything that happens on this side of this building, the fire department have to now buy back. At what cost? And that we wouldn't know. What do we do with the buildings? Do we rent them? Do we buy them from the city? If you go to an agency or a city like Stoughton, they don't have a fire department. They're part of West Pierce under contract. So really, the city of DuPont in that circumstance would be doing all the work to create the agency. They don't have fire equipment. That would have to be purchased. So all those are just contributing factors that make it less attractive. Maybe someday in 10, 15, 20 years, that might be an option when the costs are more equitable, but they're not there now. And that was just a few of the ones that we looked at.
Could you just mention utility and ambulance district?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And we looked at the growth perspective as well, and I think, Chief, the growth perspective was growing it over time within the city. And that would take, I figured, 10, 15 years to do that. And that doesn't address the problems that we're facing today. With the hybrid model of using fire department, paramedics, and private transport, that doesn't cover the second call when that unit's out. EMS district. EMS district, same situation like a hospital district. Economy of scale, DuPont going out, collecting money, like the recommendation would be the city of DuPont collecting money using a tax or a levy. That was deemed not feasible just because of the economy of scale was not there.
And as part of the hybrid model, that was a two-place. The hybrid model in terms of what's termed as a renomedic program, where you would, the fire department would hire off-duty paramedics that are already certified Pierce County paramedics and use those as essentially temporary employees for that time period that they're there. And that model has been successful in other places. However, when studied, it turns out that the timeframes and the ability to maintain that as a permanent service is not valid. Because EMS licenses are no longer valid as part-time EMS licenses in Pierce County. It's all or nothing. You have to be able to show 24/7 service. So, for example, if you're hiring your paramedic for the day is working at Key Peninsula Fire Department, and that person is getting, because they work shift work too, that's their primary job. And so the scheduling, trying to get him here or her here in time to start a shift here is difficult. Secondarily, when we looked at that, the primary employer putting out a call for overtime or something, because even if you schedule your shifts out and that person has accepted a call, on-duty call with DuPont Fire Department, and the primary employer asks you to come back, you're going to take your primary employer's offer back because they supply your benefits and all of those particular things. So that model was heavily looked at as well. So you can see there was a number of models. We broke that out. Everybody in the task force took a number of those particular things and broke those down, brought those facts back to the task force, and then they debated those around. We brought in experts related to that. And Nate was one of the Pierce County paramedics that we used heavily inside of that particular option.
Okay. Chief, you said the problems that we are facing today, that doesn't address some of the problems that we're facing today. What are the problems that we're facing today?
In the last several months, we pointed out the number of times that the advanced life support unit is not available to us. Last month, they came 23% of the time. It's not a contract, they're just, they provide the service to the city, but we don't have it. And currently, I think they were 45% available with a response time of over 15 minutes, when we can do that within 5 minutes of coverage within the city.
And, okay, so that's thank you for the overview, that's the large scale. What about the savings to the taxpayers so far as when you get transported or when you receive a service? Is there something beyond what we've already discussed here, which is the waiving of the deductible or whatever it is? Is there something else that we can capitalize on in order to keep some of these costs down? For those that do get transported, that do receive the services, is there anything else out there that can assist in keeping the levy number down for those that actually do use the service instead of those that are just potentially going to use the service? Because many of our calls go to the same places over and over again. Right? I mean, we know where the services are used in town. I see you guys leave and hang a right all the time, right? Because we know where you're going based on the numbers. So I just want to make sure that citizens, while it's going to be a service that they potentially can use, that those that are actually benefiting are shouldering their commensurate portion of the cost. So any ideas there?
There are ways to do that, particularly with the high utilizer community. If you've got a high utilizer community, for example, an assisted living facility that is regularly using services, and working with those particular entities up front. I'm doing one right now with an entity that has very high utilization of services. And there's a breakover, the way that this one is going together is if there's a breakover point. If the 911 is called, units respond, and in many cases, what we see is that there's no transport associated with that. So at a certain percentage level of those, then that particular 911 call then generates a bill directly to the facility. So there are ways to do that and recoup some of those costs. That's getting into some more advanced ways of doing that, but it is certainly possible to do that with high utilizers. As far as just general public, there are some ways. So Pierce County, if you have Pierce County lands inside of your area that you respond to, you report back to Pierce County every year, and they cut a check based on how many calls. For example, inside of my jurisdiction, the Pierce County Fair is there. So, and then there's some other public utility areas inside that area. I've got a timber company inside of my district. So every time we go there, we keep a record of that, and then a bill is sent at a certain time because there's been pre-arrangements related to that. So there are ways to do that. That's not part of the levy system. Yeah, everybody's paying that particular price, but yes, there are ways to recoup additional funds, especially for high utilizers, and that's really where you tend to focus those things.
Very good on that. Just to follow up on what Chief was saying, as we go out on our calls, we have a pretty good idea of the people we're going to see over and over and over who they've started to develop maybe a tendency to utilize this more as a in-home doctor checkup service. And that might be something that we could kind of explore some of those options that Chief was talking about, where they really don't need that emergency level care. They have something going on, and maybe they have an issue with getting to another facility. They just don't have the means to go to a doctor, and they call us and come in and almost use it as a checkup service. And that might be something to implement some kind of a billing system on. Going back to the pay-to-play as far as the ambulance ride, from our perspective on an operations level, we see as a pretty easy transition. We already have boxes on our EMRs, on our medical reports that we check resident or non-resident. And so for filing purpose, being able to, hey, this goes into the box where we're going to bill and waive that copay. This goes into the box where we're going to bill and try to collect that copay. Some of that can be done on our end, just in that patient contact. So I think for us, it's a much easier transition, not much of a cost to be able to do that. That would come back more to the city side of what it would take to track that. And I think one of the things, I'm not an expert on this part of it, but that would need to be considered is if you're going to try to go after those copays, can all the citizens afford that copay, and which ones are going to end up going to collections? And what fee would that be put on the city to go after those if we decided that's the route we want? How much time is going to be spent going to collections and trying to track that down versus just waiving it for the citizens of DuPont? So, just a couple things to consider.
There's one other thing we've been looking at for the last probably 6 months for cost recovery, and that would be for motor vehicle accidents. There's provision that if there's any leaking fluids and you use a product to clean up that spill or contain that spill, that you can bill that car insurance now as for the recovery of that incident, so from start to finish. So So for the crew, they're responsible, and the medic crew, and depending on how you write an ordinance, you could also do cost recovery for the public works response during that incident, as well as law enforcement. We've been talking with a company that does this throughout the state, and we look for probably something to come from them a little more firm in probably the next 6 to 10 months.
Thank you. Councilmember Court?
Thank you. Forgive me if I'm ignorant on this part, but currently the current EMS levy of 50 cents goes through what year now?
It stops this year, so we would need a vote sometime this year to extend it.
Right. So my question was that regardless of this year or when that would need to be renewed, these costs associated with adding ALS is above and beyond what we're currently paying. So what would happen at some point, I'm assuming that every time that this EMS levy, however many years it is, we'd have to go back and ask for it again. If they said no, but yet they said yes for the increased cost for ALS, how do we recoup that 50 cents?
Gotcha. So Councilmember, the plan would be to do away with the separate 50-cent levy vote, incorporate it into the whole amount, so that citizens don't get confused and have to add up. It's like, this is what I pay for EMS, or this is not. So if they were to approve it, the 50 cents would be wrapped up. So it would be the $1 or $2 plus the 50 cents for a grand total. And then we would not ask citizens to renew the 50 cents. It would be incorporated.
So does that have to be as part of this ballot measure that says?
No, that's up to you. You could conceivably run $1 or $2 and then again in November another 50 cent. I would recommend against that. But it is up to you.
Well, if we don't do that, then what's the option for later on combining them because the years aren't going to match up with when?
Right, but you can just tell the auditor and the county to quit collecting it. So every vote supersedes the last one. So if it's in the ballot title like it is in the suggested draft, incorporating it, the county would stop collecting 50 and start collecting $1.52.
But at some point, we're going to say we want $1.52 and not $1.02.
Right, and that was in the ballot.
Councilmember Heller?
So just so I'm clear, that 50 cents is essentially basically repealed upon enactment of this ballot question that's rolled into.
Right. It disappears.
Clarifying, it expires January 1 regardless.
Right.
It's done if you don't run it again.
So it would be rolling.
Correct. And so the next logical question is probably, well, what if we decide not to put this up for a vote? What happens if it is said? We'll have to put it out in November if you want BLS to continue.
Councilmember Cosby?
I heard you say that you have a billing company right now, so we would just continue that, right?
Correct.
Right behind you.
You wouldn't have any plans to switch billing companies based on this, would you?
Not based on this, we may choose to look at another one just for,
Yeah. It would be
for looking for better deals, but we wouldn't do it based on this only.
Okay, so basically you would be contracting with a company that's an expert in this type of billing rather than hiring people in City Hall to take care of the billing.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilmember Heller?
So I want to ask, just as someone who wants the city to have this service and wants to give you this capability, the difference between, and I've had this conversation with the mayor and I think most council members here, the difference between 4 and 5 members on your team, could you explain briefly what the difference would be between 4 and 5? Because I gotta admit that I get a little bit of heartburn looking at Sound Transit, I don't want to make a pun, coming down the tracks, and seeing the state.
Wish it was coming down the track.
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly. But we're paying for it now. Seeing the state pass budgets that are, going gonna be paid with monopoly money unless we raise taxes. And now we're looking at an additional levy of over $1. So, asking the residents to do this over and over again, maybe this would now go over to Mike after we hear about the difference between 4 and 5, but we're talking, I think it's 80 cents for 4 estimate? Is that roughly 80 cents? And 79. And then $1.02, I think, was in the packet, $1.03. Going from 80 to $1.03, Mike, I think you have the most experience passing these types of measures, and I'm curious what effects you've seen, or how, the difference between 80 and 1, just mentally, can be a lot for a voter. And I've been to several of these meetings where we brief these to residents, and those are typically some of our most engaged residents who understand our need for the service. I get a little nervous thinking about someone who might not necessarily be as involved, saying I'm okay with it, another $1, versus seeing 80. I worry about how many votes we need to pass this and how many we might lose just between that extra 20 cents. So, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. I think to put it simply, it's significant in my opinion. I believe when we are at a 4-person, there's going to be a fair amount of time where we're still going to need help from outside agencies. And I don't know if that help's going to be there. Recent history has shown that help's not available. It's definitely not reliable. At 5, the overall consensus of the department is we can pretty much be self-sufficient. At 5, we can be off on a transport and still be able to handle that next call in the city. We have enough personnel here. We'll be able to handle multiple patients. Today we have a perfect example of having 2 patients, and with only 4 people on today, basically the fire department was out of service while we were doing transport. So not only just from a morale standard, the personal connection to the department, being able to provide that kind of service, I just think at 5, we're going to have the skills, the trained personnel, the ability, the manpower to handle what on 90% of the time that we're going to be able to handle. Something that's on I-5 like we had here last year, a major incident, we're still going to need help on that. But as far as within the city, I really think we're going to be self-sufficient at 5. And not have to worry about, is there a private available today? Is there another ALS private available today? What happens if we get 2 patients? What happens if we're, this or that? We're just going to be able to do it on our own. And that's going to be a good feeling for us. It's going to be it should be a good feeling for the citizens to know that consistency, that level of reliability is in place.
When we went into this, we were asked, is ALS practical in DuPont, and what would be the best method for that? Many options were looked at, and the 4 and 5 came out in the end. There's both and I appreciate Firefighter Roberts' comments on that related to being able to do that operationally. There are some statistical and practical reasons why the 5 made it as the recommendation as well. And one of those is today you have a 3-person engine company in DuPont, and your portion of that is paid for by this EMS levy that you currently have, which is going to go away. It's going to sunset, and you're going to be bringing on this new tax that you're talking about. And for some reason that goes away. Now those people that are associated with that need to go away too. Now you have a less service than you have today in a 4-person model. So you go to a 4-person model and that tax goes away. Now you go to a less service than what you currently are operating at today. Additionally, a 3-person engine company is the minimum NFPA requirement for a national standard. That is, in and of itself, a low number for an engine company. It's pretty common in Pierce County. I run a two-person engine company at times. I'll drop down to a two-person company, which is what you're talking about in this particular case. But if you're looking at meeting standards and time standards of being able to accomplish work, especially in your particular situation where you're much more isolated than many of the communities in Pierce County, having two people show up on an engine company because the other two may be gone on a transport or just not responding with that particular company becomes much more demanding. You see your injury rates go up, you see lots of things start to occur in that particular case. Your sick rates go up, so there's a practical standpoint to that as well.
I'm trying not to get too much into what's required on calls, but for a typical CPR, just having 5 versus 4, there's just so much more that can be done at a higher level at a faster rate. We tried to show in the demonstration on the CPR, having 2 people rotate out with compressions, having somebody on airway, have somebody taking paper, you have somebody getting medications ready. Hands get used up really quick, and having that 5 versus 4s, in my opinion, there's an exponential benefit to that.
Councilmember Gorski.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna ask,
Are you still responding?
I was just, I was gonna commend, Councilmember Howard, though, that's, 5 is definitely better support, but you bring up good questions. There's no guarantee either one's going to pass. The higher the dollar, of course, the probable more difficulty with it. You're the first person, the 4th-member team's fine. You're the second person to have a serious incident. You sure wish there would have been a 5-member team and there's still support. But you know, that's an important question. I can't guarantee that either one will pass. I know that I believe in it. And I'm going to, if you decide to do this, give everything I can to have whichever one you vote for pass.
And just to finish this up, Councilman Heller, well, we're still responding to this question. You know, these guys are staying away from it. And before I say this, I want to be completely out in the open. At no point did the task force ever consider fire support or fire operations in this discussion. We stay away with the 10th pull. You won't see it mentioned what's in here. But the community meetings brought this up, not us. Well, what happens since they're dual trained? What happens to our fire coverage, right? And so I would like the chiefs to talk about that. That's an indirect benefit. That's not why, you know, we went to the community with this, but there is a benefit that they haven't spoken about yet.
Yeah, I'll talk first on this. Having 5 is so much greater capacity on every call. Overall scene management, every incident we try to cover 3 areas. A strategic level, which would be the incident commander. A tactical level, which would be the officer inside directing the crews and overseeing that operation. And the firefighter in the task level. Anytime one person's removed from that crew, someone has to do dual roles. Incidents that happen in the roadway, having someone that has the big, broad view to make sure the crews are operating in a safe environment. One of our firefighters or law enforcement officers doesn't get accidentally hit by a car in a work zone on an accident scene. You know, the benefit of when we get re-rated by the rating bureau in 6 years, that was some of the things they pointed out, staffing levels. And if this goes through, the 5-person, our staffing level have been increased. So I would imagine an improvement in our ISO rating.
Councilmember Gorski.
okay. I'm gonna ask for 2 things. I want data. I want data on the last 3 years of your calls, your classification calls, and how many simultaneous calls you needed. I'm also gonna ask for utilization rates, or who is getting the calls. And the reason I'm saying this is I don't get the luxury in my job to say, in my opinion, this is what's gonna happen. I gotta speak with data. And we're gonna make a data-based decision on what we do. And it's a very kind of, we don't like talking about it, we're kind of being an actuary here. We're kind of assessing risk. And if we're talking about the meteor hitting Earth scenario, that we have X amount of dual calls where we're not available units, or, you know, we're just stuck. I want to know what that number is in a hard number. And I want to be honest about that number too, because what we heard at the last council meeting is don't go to scare tactics. And I'm going to say, I'm going to chide you, this is scare tactics. Well, it would be better, of course, if I had a second car when my car broke down. That would have been great. So we can't do that. We have to talk about what is the best decision for the community that we can afford and speak with data. And if data is available, make that available for us to make this decision on 4 or 5 on the permanent or the multi-year. Because what we really need to do is pull back that veneer and take away the opportunity for people to start shooting holes in it, because they can get this little kernel of doubt that maybe there's something here that we're not getting the full story and yada yada. So I want to see the data. I want to know how many times you're stuck waiting for another call unit to arrive to assist. And the reason being is I want to understand what's going on. How many of these calls are now increasing to our partners here who were developing land? And how many of these are based on employers calling us for injuries on the job site? As we're bringing in an influx of people, how many are happening at our hotels? How many are happening about the transient nature of our community? Is it happening at lunchtime where people are visiting our town? Is it happening on weekends? I want to know what your call rates look like when, and how many times you've been left in the lurch because you had a transport in progress and you had another medical call that required a transport. So these are the things that we need to know. And we looked at this before, and this was provided to me by the fire department in the past. And I will just take the raw data and I will aggregate it myself. I will look at it and try to make a determination. But what I want to see is that needs to be reported out. How many times something can possibly happen? We can play the parlor game all night long on that. And there's a lot of scenarios that can go wrong. And there's planning for contingency, and there's the reality of what we can afford. And like Councilman Halder said, what the people are willing to, on a dollar amount, whatever mental obstacle they need to get over, with all the other taxes that are being heaped on the community at this time that we have no control over. This is the one thing we do have control over, and it's a service that will directly benefit us immediately. So we need to be aware of that and broadcast that, because this is very much a DuPont-based decision, and whatever happens in the King County, Snohomish, gerrymandered district that's got us in the bind we are now, we need to kind of peel back and eliminate any of that doubt from the voter who has to make this decision in the future, because it is going to weigh on people. I haven't renewed my tabs yet. That comes in June. You know, so, and a lot of the community hasn't renewed their tabs yet either. And what you don't want is this hitting their renewal period when this goes on the ballot a month before, because the decision will be made for you. So let's be as straightforward as possible, give all the plain facts, all the scenarios, and let us make the decision that the citizens will ultimately decide. I'm all in favor of the citizens of DuPont making this decision based on all the information at hand, and I trust they will make a wise decision, whatever that outcome is. But I want to see that data, and I do not want to talk in this what if, or in my opinion, because that doesn't have any bearing with me, and it doesn't have any bearing for someone who's about to fork over $600 to register their 3 cars. So just keep that in mind. Give me that data, and that data will be used on whether or not I vote to put this on the ballot or not.
Great question. I can answer some of that for the month of February, that we've had JBLM come to 5.5% of our calls, and we were on another call. And I've been tracking that really this last quarter. And at some point, we're taking that unit away from their response area. So that's what it was for currently. And I can go back a few months and get that. It's been a little higher, it's been lower. It's hovering probably about an average of 6% of the time. Another unit is handling our calls while we're on the call or on a transport. Now, on the simultaneous calls, I look back and count 40 minutes in spaces, and we're getting about 12 a quarter where we're having call after call. And if we're on the call now, we're transporting more. The occurrence of having someone else come in is just going to increase. But I can get a firmer number for you, and I'll get that to a city administrator, Dan, and can get that information to you.
I want to see the trend. You know what I'm saying?
I absolutely, we're going to try our best.
Because I want to know what happened before this
Mike.
was built and these things were built and where it's going.
Councilmember Coffey.
Yes, on that same vein, how many times were, the transport was not available, and the patient's family transported them. So, I don't know how far back you want to go, but I know that that's been a problem in the past. So, and then following up on that, how many times do people not even call because they know we didn't have transport in the past? That's out there too.
Well, there's no way to know that.
Right, I know, but the point of the matter is, in the realm of possibility, there's probably times when people have driven themselves to the hospital. So, but anyway.
And I assume you're interested in how many times they've made an ALS transport. Because they're BLS, but when ALS is not available, they've made transport with their services.
Right, but I know for a fact, in the past few years, there's been a lot of times when there hasn't been transport available, period, regardless what it was. So, I don't know how many years back you want for the data, but I know that is a fact. So, you can come up with something. Thanks.
Any other comments or questions?
I can tell you just offhand that we do have citizens here in DuPont that when we go to their homes, they know that if they use the ambulance, it takes the fire department out of service, and they'll choose not to do that because they feel just that obligation that maybe I'm not that bad, when they should go by ambulance, but they have kind of a moral obligation. They say, I don't want to take you guys out of service. We're going to find a way to get there ourselves. So we do run into that from time to time as well. And that's unfortunate when they really should be going by ambulance.
Assuming that this were to take place and we go with the 5-person option, how long for implementation? How long would it take you to hire all of that staffing? I've seen how long it takes to just replace one firefighter. And I know that people in this community, we tend to trend towards instant gratification when it comes to things of this nature. So what timeline would we be looking at?
This is successful. We're at that process start, midnight that night, and we're already looking at ways to do that through civil service with testing processes. So it would take 2018 to build it up, with the goal of 2019 to be full service ALS.
Yeah, so it'll take a year to bring this online. If this, we've had the discussion because you got several things going on simultaneously. You have got to hire new people. You've got to train some of the people we've got, and the paramedic training and certification is a pretty lengthy process. And so we've already had some preliminary discussions that it's really going to be, no matter how you do it, it's going to take 2018 from 1 January where the tax would go into effect. The goal would be on midnight, the 31st of December, 2018, going to 2019, you flip the switch and you say we're now certified. Because the department has to become certified. So it isn't going to be an instantaneous process. It's going to take that time to build it. And there's probably not any other way to do it any faster.
I am interested in receiving some more information on the high utilizer aspect that was discussed, and the cost recovery through the insurance companies for whatever the incident is. I'm interested in that too, just to offlay some of the burden.
Yeah, and I don't, Ted, you correct me if I'm wrong, is that necessary for the levy itself, or is that a process we can do after the levy?
It's a process not connected with the levy, simply because the levy is just a straight rate and everybody has to pay it. But what Councilman Easter's talking about, Chief Jensen, it's related, but it is not part of the levy. So we can certainly bring a couple examples forward and talk about that.
So I'd ask Councilman Easton, I agree with what you're saying. Can we hold that as an action to get the information that's being asked for the actual decision next week? because I think what you're asking, and I agree, if we have some habitual high users in this, there are models out there that help us do some of that cost recovery, but that won't be tied to a levy vote, that's tied to a process that occurs separate from it.
I think from a citizen voting perspective, the knowledge that we're looking to attribute costs to those that use services more than perhaps they do, and nobody hopes to use, nobody wants to use it, but we want it there when we have to use it. And so I think that might be good information to share preceding a potential vote.
Well, I agree,
There's
the potential vote is
value
1
there.
August.
Yes.
So my concern is we got 1 week between now
No.
and next week,
No.
and if you guys vote for it, let us use that education
Yes.
period as part of that package that goes out there.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand what you're asking for. There's some specific numbers, as far back as we can get, that deals with simultaneity of calls, calls not answered. I think they understand that level of data, so we'll do that. And if we get that sooner rather than later, we'll distribute that to you via email so that you can have that. What I would like to get is a sense of the council on whether, when we draft the language, you want co-pay exclusion in there or not. I understand your point, it's well taken. That gets some up to the high user kind of idea anyway. But from a council perspective, I need to know if that's your position so we can draft that in the language for you to see next week. So if you want co-pays to be collected, just give me a thumb. To be collected. Okay, so Mike wants them
I
collected.
have a question on this.
Okay.
Before I give you my thumb, if that's okay. So, forgive me if I missed it, the current policy on copay for a BLS transport, we currently do that now? Is there a way to? Is there a way to delineate between someone being transported that's a low acuity patient, maybe someone that is typically a higher utilizer, and someone that's actually needs emergent care? Is that possible? Because I think I would like to see someone pay for their care for a low acuity patient. And
That gets, possibly, this group certainly didn't look at that particular thing, and I'm not an expert on that particular aspect. It's potentially possible. I know that there are some real requirements as it relates to how you treat individual patients differently when it comes to Medicare and Medicaid. So you have to be very careful about that. When you're talking about the 20% of your collectibles, which would be private insurance, and that's pretty standard numbers there, those you can do lots of things with, but your Medicare and Medicaid patients that you're dealing with and billing, that has to be very standard. That's all set up by CMS billing, and treating those patients differently at any particular time, that can be construed as fraud, and those are big penalties and fines associated with that. So it's possible. I'm not that particular person, and there are people that could answer that probably through your billing agency to give you expert advice in that. We have 2 really good billing agencies right here in the county, and you utilize one of those. So yeah, they would be able to answer those questions.
And for frequency use, the billing company would be it. So if we pass this policy, say, they would have in their system, and every time a bill came through, every time a response came through that was reported, it would be in their system, so they can set things up like that, so that if they just cracked another 20, they can end up, and we know it's time to pay that extra fee.
Let me recommend this. Why don't we include the copay exclusion in the draft resolution, and then you can amend it out if you choose to. So next week, if you decide you do not want to exclude residents from release of copay, you just amend it out of the body of it.
Mr. Mayor, I don't mean to throw a wrench into this, maybe, honestly, I don't know if this is appropriate for this conversation, but, it's, well, it is, it needs to be considered, and I'm not a resident of DuPont, but I hear this conversation about, it's a valid conversation, it really is. But when we start talking about patients who are using the system over and over and over, it causes me to stop and think a little bit, because what about that patient who has insurance, has a major medical issue, can't afford a copay, we go to them multiple times, the bills start stacking up, and now all of a sudden they have another major event, and the thought that comes into their head is, I can't call 911 because I can't afford the ride to the hospital. I worry about that. So now instead of having a treatable issue, they're hesitating to call. And again, I apologize, but I'm living in a what-if world.
Well, I don't.
Fire services, we train, what if this happens, what if that happens? So you have that repeat customer who hesitates to call 911 because now they're afraid of that bill.
That's not how insurance works, though.
I understand that.
Because insurance is capped, right? At some point, if you have another major event. Because I've gone through major events, and I've hit my ceiling, right? I've hit my ceiling, and I paid all that I could pay by statute, by what my policy said. When you're sick and you're grabbing your chest, I don't think a lot of people are saying, I can't afford this. Because I can tell you, I would disagree with you, because I'm someone who went through it, okay? So I'm going to tell you what I thought. I don't care what this costs. I just want to feel better.
Sure.
That's what I did, and I did this twice. So I've got 3 scars on my chest. I've been through it 3 times. I don't think at all about what it's going to cost when I'm laying in that room, okay? So that's not your concern. Your concern is to give them the best care that you can possibly give them. And it's really not up to you to decide whether or not they can afford it. We provide service to everybody. Now, if someone chooses and makes that personal decision not to call, that's as personal decision as people not going to the doctor regularly or not doing other things that they should be doing. Things happen, we understand that. That's the nature of emergency services. That in a true emergency, we're not going to go and start dissecting the what if of, if there's a call, you respond, you don't try to drum up customers to start calling, because that could put an undue burden on us where people who need service, you're now responding to a call because someone thinks they need service, and you've mentioned that in the past. I don't worry about the people who are using it as a Meals on Wheels or a friend in need or dial a prayer. I don't know what their motivations of calling 911 are, but when they're there and they're sick, you're treating them and transporting them to protocol, and we can't get wrapped around that because we have to ask everyone here to cast a vote. But more importantly, we have to ask the people who were not at the meetings, who did not have privy information of this, who are not going to study this. They're going to pick up a ballot and vote. They count as much as everyone else who's put a lot of thought into this. So when we decide language and we decide coverage, it is for the benefit of everyone with the intent of trying to provide it. So I don't want to go into the what if world. I know what if as well. And what I do is I statistically predict things every day. That's my job. So if you want to do an ANOVA on this, and what I want from the data is I want to know how many people who needed ALS were left waiting. Not BLS, ALS. Because that's a subset of the data that you're reporting. Because that's what I'm concerned about. How many times do people have a major medical event that need an ALS transport? I want to know that number, not BLS. Not a kid that fell off the bike and has a broken arm. That can wait, and we know that. And it's hard to say this, and people think this is glib. It's not. This is the nuts and bolts of trying to get something financed and have it be palatable to, the largest group of people possible. This is why we do grapple with copay and whether or not it's fair or not. I mean, if I could provide that service for free, it would be great, but we struggle with this service, and we struggle with passing these levies. So let's not put ourselves in a hindrance and go back to what was told to us at the last council meeting, where someone who we respect their opinion came up and said to us, I don't think you should use fear tactics. And I agree. Let's just give them the facts and let the smart people of DuPont decide.
Okay, if there are no more comments on this subject, again, what I remind you, and we'll write it in and you can amend it out, we'll get you what data we can this week. And just a reminder that the council's not imposing a tax. All you would be doing is giving the citizens that opportunity. I mean, and that's key. This is a decision made by the voters of DuPont. You know, if there's a way we could list multiple options, that would be nice, but you're almost guaranteed to lose when you do that. So we got to pick one and try to do the best job possible. So, Ed?
Sorry, 6-year basic sunset, that's.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, we do need to include that, right. Permanent, sunset, 6 or 10. Yeah, my recommendation was to go with the 6, like our current one, and that, you know, I don't like the idea of permanent taxes. You know? If it's good, if we do a good job with it, and it works, then it'll be sustained, just like our current EMS is. And if it's not good, then it ought to fail, then it ought to not be sustained, and, you know, us or whoever's sitting in these seats ought to have to figure something else out. It'll stand on its own. Okay, so 6-year sunset, and we'll write the copay exclusion in it and give you all the option to amend that out. What I'd like to do is give 5 minutes for a quick break. We got to reset for the next topic. To the task force, thank you so very much. Appreciate your time, Chief, Mike, and particularly you guys came in. You two, you work here, so but appreciate it very much. And so we'll take 5 minutes.